Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode with Ben Locwin and Scott Endicott. On this episode, our title is somewhat provocative, which is Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. But the question I wanted to pose to you all is how can there be insight to healthcare consumers on how to better interpret just the variety of information in front of them and even give caregiver feedback to make the right informed decisions either for or with the patient? So, with that long winded question, how would you like to start off?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. Great intro lead. Provocative, definitely. So I think on the lies, damn lies, and statistics side of things, there are people who suggest you can massage statistics to say anything you want. And though that's the way it seems on social media and on media and news outlets, it seems as though that's possible and that's what happens. Good statistics really are based on the data which underpin them. And the data are the data, and they're agnostic. They're not good or bad. They just are. And to try to combat that, there's something that the FDA has put out recently called the Rumor Control Initiative. And essentially, it's to try to avoid the misinformation that exists out there. And I think it's been really disheartening to see the amount of misinformation and disinformation in general, and certainly regarding the medical information that could help or harm patients, which circulates on social media. A couple of the things that the FDA tries to target in this the avoidance of misinformation campaign, the Rumor Control Initiative, is check the source. So first and foremost, who's the source of the information, and cross-check it with reliable sources. Looking beyond the headlines to get full context is always something that a smart consumer of data should be doing. Understand if it's a post you're reading, what's the intent behind the post. Everybody's got some intentionality or a motive there. And they also go on, this is something that you can pull up on the FDA's website too. It's fda.gov. It's under rumor control. They address things like, why does misinformation spread so quickly? And it comes from sometimes from a good place. People want to protect those that they care about. They want to feel connected, feel that they have new information that others don't know or don't have. And unfortunately, that allows people to dip into conspiracy theories. And it's harmful because people believe and act on misinformation, and overall, then public health suffers. I'm glad that the FDA has taken this tack because there's been a lot of aggressive vitriol against FDA. I would say more maybe towards the CDC, the WHO since the pandemic. But like I said, at its heart, the data which exist regarding some of these medical treatments that we've been talking about in the prior episode, it really boils down to drug statistics. So what do the numbers really mean? And everybody's heard about placebos and placebo-controlled trials, for example. And at the end of the day, a randomized clinical trial is required for all licensed and marketed pharmaceutical treatments. So basically, in every case, what's done is you take a drug and you compare it to a placebo, and it has to demonstrate statistically significant superiority over the placebo. So the basic statistics that govern drug trials are things called hypothesis testing. They use confidence intervals, which show how confident we are in a given range of results and that the results didn't arrive by chance, and an analysis of variance, which is oftentimes something that we would use looking at multi-center. So if we have a trial running in multiple sites around the world, so multi-center placebo-controlled trials would use something called ANOVA, which is analysis of variance, in order to evaluate the size of the difference in efficacy between the study medication and placebo. And at the end of the day, all these are just robust statistical testing regimes so that we can be confident that we've got a trial of a certain size, hundreds of patients, maybe thousands of patients, that the drug is doing what we think it will do. And it doesn't fall then into the category of alternative medicine, things like homeopathy or herbal treatments, etc. So it's really as simple or as complicated as that.
So, could I ask, one of the things that I have struggled with is advertising around pharmaceutical products. And that's as ubiquitous as any other advertising. And I try to be informed, but I really struggle with the advertising because it's designed to do that. It's designed to get my attention and tell me the benefits. Of course, it tells me they give a disclaimer for potential side effects. But how can I think through the evaluation of pharmaceutical products I see advertised with utilizing my primary care physician as a resource to help me do my own advocacy?
It's a great point, Tom, and it's one of the motivators to Ben and I even decided to stay on this topic here because while there's a number of positive developments within the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry, one of the sort of concerning aspects is marketing and branding as a front foot forward engagement with direct to customer engagements. And direct to provider has been the case nearly forever. Those folks used to be called detailers, that their job was to go out and essentially provide all the details to healthcare providers and then try to get them to muscle them to sell their to rather prescribe their product. We're now in the direct to patient space where you don't have to knock on doors anymore. All you have to do is buy television time. And this really came from started to become really alarmed with this, having worked with label control and label development programs for the better part of 15 years. It's a huge part of the compliance space in developing a drug or a device or whatever and getting it approved. And now in the advertising branding space, you can push your product into spaces that it normally wouldn't be, which are people's living rooms, right? Where they don't have the advantages of understanding biochemistry or biological impacts of various drugs, toxicology, et cetera. And there is an increasing concern to your question, how do we look at it? I think ultimately, how do we guard against that is to accept the fact that there's going to be a certain level of information content shared, but it's very important that you have a trusted healthcare advisor and provider that can help interpret that data for you. Some real practical examples of that are, and the biggest concern that showed up on my radar was about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a commercial during the Super Bowl for a treatment that was necessary to treat constipation as a side effect of opioid usage. And my risk brain immediately asked the question, wait a minute, we have a problem with people we have a big enough problem in this country with people taking opioids that also have significant enough constipation issues that there is a drug that will pay to be advertised in the Super Bowl. The the mind reels at that, right? At the amount of patients that are required. And it just immediately signaled, wow, we really have an opioid problem, which of course was true and has become even more true since then. But those types of signals are things that we can listen for amidst a lot of the noise that's presented to us as patients and caregivers in that space. So again, applying critical thinking to just about any of these aspects is vital. Secondarily, it's using common sense to listen to that and recognize that, first of all, my healthcare provider should be in this discussion. Second of all, I need to be making decisions that are common sense oriented, both for myself, your family members, whoever it may be, are really the two critical aspects, I think, that can help to offset some of that sort of advertising and branding invasion that's become very much endemic to our, social media as well as just our standard media culture.
Yeah. And I think seeing behind the curtain with the direct-to-consumer advertisements and direct-to-provider advertisements, we've gone pretty much blind because of the saturation. We see it blanketing print media, television commercials, online adverts for years now. But I think what often stands out in the consumer's minds is that on these ads, they read through a litany of side effects for the treatments. And sometimes it's laughable that anyone would want to take any medication that lists so many specific potential adverse effects. But the drug companies are required by the FDA to list these, which is a good thing. So I think getting back to your question, Tom, you've got a healthcare provider for a reason. And your provider, it used to be a great degree more of information asymmetry. People didn't have access to doing their own research on Google, for example, however good or bad that research may be. Now people will show up with a drug advertisement or something they've printed out from Google, and they say, hey, I saw this ad on TV, I printed this thing out, I'd like to take this. And I think that it's the shared decision making. That responsibility is between you and your provider to now sit down together, think about it. All of this goes back to the benefit versus the risks. Every drug that exists has risks associated with it, and many of them have benefits associated with them. So with your provider and armed with your information that you bring there, what are the risks associated with treatment and what are the benefits, and do the benefits for you outweigh the risks? And that answer won't be the same for every patient who may want that same drug, for example. So I think bringing it back to the idea of the shared decision making, people shouldn't be afraid of knowledge and information. But again, thinking about the rumor control initiative, the quality of the source of the information matters most. And if you have high quality information and you are interested in more information about it, or is that something right for you, then having that conversation with your healthcare provider is the only way to do it properly.
Scott, let me end with a question to you. In a prior episode, when Ben talked about the drug Ozempic and weight loss, and concluded with as fine a statement on weight loss as you can have, it's going to have to entail some lifestyle changes. You want to keep that. And it's been that way for a long time before we had Ozempic.
Correct.
But how do you help a patient, or how would you counsel a patient to think through the ancillary changes that they might need to make, whether it's a lifestyle change in terms of your diet, whether it's full exercise, whether it's walking down the street and building up to 10, 20, 30 minutes of walking a day? How would you help someone think through some of the other things that you should consider in addition to both of the medicines and treatments we've talked about in this episode?
Yeah, and I want to be clear very quickly that I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on television. Neither of those are true. But if we were to take that question and focus it on what I do, which is very much providing technology and operational solutions that address healthcare challenges, whether they be telemedicine, clinical supply chain challenges. If I take the telemedicine example, one of the emergent opportunities, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in our next episode, but one of the ways that's being addressed is treating obesity as a chronic care condition. One of the other outcomes from COVID was that telemedicine and remote healthcare has received approval codes from the Center for Medicaid, CMS, and within that, you've seen the ability to extend care outside of the office and into the home. With chronic care management, for instance, there's a reimbursement code where you can now manage obesity remotely via telemedicine. So you can do things like monitor activity with a digital Fitbit. We're getting into the Star Wars and Star Trek stuff now, right? And be able to, the physician can then track that activity and be able to make recommendations during the patient's 30 days of a month, for instance. So the standard behavioral health changes have to be in place, or you're going to end up, completing the circle, as Ben mentioned prior, by basically putting the weight back on once you stop the drug that basically tells your body to stop eating. So really, behavioral health is going to end up becoming, and personal behavioral health is going to become the very much the facilitator of any change in the personal health care, especially related to what is a crisis and an epidemic in obesity in the U.S. I answered that adequately. If not, I could move on for another few minutes to talk about
Actually,
it.
you did. And that brings us to the end of this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask both of you all if our listeners wanted more information or perhaps even to connect with you all, what would be the best place for them to do, Ben?
On LinkedIn or a simple Google search.
Scott?
Same here, Scott A. Endicott on LinkedIn.
Gentlemen, thanks again. I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode.